Hello and welcome back to MadEmmyify True Crime. Tonight's video is one of my personal favourite witch trials that I have covered on my ASMR channel. I think it may have been the first witch trial I did, in fact, and that is the case of the Newcastle witch trials. I suppose it was a favourite because it was very unknown, and I got to do a lot of research into lots of different things, even though it was such a big witch trial. Anyway, I'm going to dive into the case because I'm aware that I am rambling. The case of the Newcastle witches was one of the biggest witch trials in England, yet the story is not as well known as those of Pendle and Berwick, which I have also covered in my ASMR channel, although Berwick Witches was also done on this channel. The tale of the Newcastle witches is one of a ruthless corporation, a coal monopoly, a corrupt witch finder, and a sceptical lieutenant who saved an accused witch from the gallows. Our tale starts in 17th century Newcastle. It was a time of turmoil, civil war, regicide and religious upheaval. It was also a very superstitious age, and an age of many incurable diseases, and in such times people often looked for scapegoats. Newcastle in the mid-17th century had been in the thick of things. Industrialisation on Tyneside as a whole had created a large class of poor and disgruntled workers, and as many as 40% of households in Newcastle did not have a fireplace. In 1636, the city was devastated by an outbreak of the plague, and from a population of 20,000, 7,000 people died. In the impending civil war, Newcastle found itself on the royalist side. As a hub of the coal trade, it was a rich source of funds for the king. As tension rose in the UK, Charles I introduced the English prayer book in Scotland, and London merchants saw this as a perfect time to hit the king where it hurt, so they encouraged the Scots to capture Newcastle, disrupting the lucrative coal monopoly. The town was captured in 1640, then again after a siege in 1644. I'm just going to adjust things. By the end of the 1640s, with the Civil War over, the corporation of Newcastle was now in the Puritans from Scotland's control in place of the royal burgesses. The Puritans were just as money-grabbing and continued to exercise the lucrative coal trade. This angered local brewer Ralph Gardner, and it's actually thanks to Gardner's book that we have so much information about the Newcastle witch trial. Gardner was unhappy with the punitive tax on the coal trade exerted by Newcastle Council and the risks to ships and men sailing up the Tyne to pay it. He felt that North Shields should be the focus for trade, as it was at the mouth of the Tyne, rather than all of the ships having to sail inland. To emphasise his case, Gardner drew on the injustice carried out by the coal corporation. As part of his book, he also looked at the brutal public humiliations and punishments given to those visiting the town. One such punishment was the Scold's Bridle, which is an iron muzzle which is worn on the head. It has a metal framework that went over the head and a 2.5-inch plate that kind of goes in the mouth, pressing onto the tongue and lifting it up at the same time. This prevents the wearer from speaking and results in unpleasant side effects for the wearer, including excess salivation and mouth fatigue. They were mostly used to punish women who were considered troublesome, as, you know, all women are trouble, aren't they? Gardner also took statements relating to the 1650 witch trial, including that of Eleanor Lonsdale, who was prosecuted for trying to dissuade witnesses from speaking out against the accused. Fear of witchcraft was rife. The new Puritan regime fostered this fear with a more fundamental reading of the Bible, specifically the passage, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." In March 1649, Newcastle Council heard a petition concerning witches. The Puritan Council decided that all witches should be tried and enlisted a Scottish witch hunter or witch pricker to find these individuals. The witch trials that happened in Newcastle in Scotland were notable because of the use of witch pricking. This process involved piercing the accused person's skin with a needle, pin or bodkin, as it was believed that if they possessed a witch's or devil's mark, they would not feel any pain. The witch's mark is different from a witch's teat, which I will explain in a bit. The mark was believed to be a permanent marking placed by the devil on his initiates to seal their obedience and service to them. Now, how the mark is created differs, as some believe it was from the devil piercing the flesh with his claw, others say it was created with a hot iron brand, and some accounts say it is created by the devil licking the individual. The witch's teat, however, is something different. This is a raised bump or wart on the body that the devil would use to drain the witch's blood, hence why they would not bleed or feel any pain from this pricking. John Kincaid was the witch pricker Newcastle Council hired to solve their witch problem. Upon his arrival, the magistrate's bellman announced around the town that anyone with a complaint against a witch to denounce them, and that the accused would be taken to the town hall. Soon 30 people were brought before the magistrate and witch pricker. Pricking was not the only way to identify witches. It's also used as a form of torture. Suspected witches would often be stabbed until they confessed. Torture had been made illegal in England, but this did not stop witch hunters. The accused would often be deprived of sleep, forced to walk for hours until they confessed. In the case of Matthew Bonner, who was accused of such crimes as shape-shifting into a cat, luring children to be sacrificed, as well as necromancy, Bonner was forced to walk barefoot over broken bricks while being led by a mule in the dungeons of Newcastle's Castle Keep. He was tortured in this way for 24 hours, and eventually his feet were so damaged that the bones became exposed. Some women would also be sodomized and beaten. Witch dunking was also used as a method of torture. The accused witch would have their thumbs tied to their big toes. This forced them into a crouching position. They would then be dunked to see if they floated. If they floated, they were a witch. If they sank and drowned, well, they were innocent and God would see them into heaven. The village pond in Washington in Tyne and Wear was used for 3 such trials in 1649. Of the 30 women in the Newcastle trial, 27 were found guilty. 2 were deemed innocent, but 1 caused some controversy. The final woman who was accused was not your stereotypical warty old crone, but a good-looking, well-presented young woman. The accused witch would be brought in front of a jury of men. Their undergarments and underskirts would then be removed, and the prick test would then be performed. Lieutenant Colonel Hobson was at the trial and witnessed this degrading spectacle. He had medical knowledge from his time in the military and accused John Kincaid and his aide of conning the court. He accused them of either sleight of hand, obscuring the actual prick, then not pricking the skin, and added if it was not sleight of hand, then based on his medical knowledge, perhaps the witch was embarrassed at her private parts being exposed to this whole male jury, and they would blush and the blood would rush to their face because they were blushing so hard, and this would lead to a lack of blood when the prick test was performed. Hobson insisted the test be redone, and this time this attractive woman passed. Despite his intervention, 14 women and 1 man were hung on Newcastle Town Moor on August the 21st, 1649. These were Matthew Bonner, Isa Brown, Margaret Madison, Anne Watson, Eleanor Henderson, Eleanor Rogers, Elizabeth Dobson, Mrs. Elizabeth Anderson, Jane Hunter, Jane Coupling, Margaret Brown, Margaret Moffat, and Eleanor Robson. I'm sure I listed her twice. As Margaret Brown was hung, she cursed for a sign of her innocence to be shown. As soon as she dropped from the gallows, blood gushed onto the crowd. Somehow the rope had severed her jugular, and the crowd was coated with her blood as she spun around on this rope. As for the witch hunter John Kincaid and his assistant, after Hobson had proved fraud at the trial, he and his assistant fled Newcastle. He was arrested but escaped to Scotland. He was eventually recaptured and later hanged after confessing to causing the deaths of 220 English and Scottish women. After the witches were hung on the town moor, their remains were all buried in unmarked graves in St Andrew's Churchyard in Newcastle. However, in January 2008, the churchyard began to be renovated and teeth, pieces of skull and rib bones were uncovered. Although it couldn't be proven that it was speculated that these may have been the bones of the Newcastle witches, it was also claimed that these bones were cursed after one of the workmen that was digging up this churchyard broke out in blisters after he had touched some of these bones. Though, again, that's probably superstition. I hope that you enjoyed that reading of the Newcastle Witches. I know it's been a while since I read it, so I was a little bit rusty in places, so apologies. But I hope I've educated and informed you. Good night, and don't have nightmares.